Alright, this is chapter 10.5 day 2, but before I get to it I need to make sure you understand what might happen to you if you don't do your job today. Yes, I do understand I'm absent from the classroom today. That does not mean you should act out of your normal range of behavior. I think you know what the normal range is. If your name is written down for excessive off-task behavior by anyone in the room, that could be the co-teacher or the sub, three things are going to happen. First thing is you're going to receive a permanent 0 for today's Math XL assignment. Second thing is you're going to be moved to a permanent special location, which means that I'll have you out of the way for the rest of the year, off to the side, either sitting by me, facing the wall somewhere, or 3, you're going to have all your most recent Math XL scores are unchangeable. So what happens is that you get your 0 today. You'll probably be moved somewhere away from wherever it is that you're having issues with. And then if you have any low scores in your Math XL right now, you're not going to be able to make those up. I'm taking away your right to make those up, because obviously if you have enough time to mess around, then those scores didn't mean anything to you today. So you might finish today's work, and that's fine. But if you have any low scores, you better make sure you get to those first before you start playing those games, because it's going to probably mess you up. So again, if you finish early, work on your past assignments to increase your grade, but please do not make the wrong choice and expect for me to give you a break. That is not going to happen if you choose to do wrong today. If you're close to a person or persons who are doing wrong, I suggest you just raise your hand, let somebody know you need to move away, because you don't want to get caught up in something that you really should not have been caught up in. So I know who typically does mess around, and you might, again, if you're in that group, you might want to make sure you move away from them today so nothing bad happens. Other than that, we're looking at day 2 of graphing square root functions. Yesterday we focused on graphing the square root functions. We should have gotten at least a solid idea on how the parent function moved. Today what we're going to look at is something what we call the domain of a square root function. It is pretty simple as long as we understand how to find how the square root works. So let's look at the following values in our calculators real fast. When I type in square root of 75, I get a number. Doesn't really matter what that number is, but I get a number. When I type in square root of 93, I just need to know that I get a number. When I type in square root of 0, I get a 0, but I still get a number. When I type in square root of negative 4, you notice that the calculator says it's a non-real answer, which means that I do not get a number. I think we've kind of talked about this earlier. The bottom line in this is that you cannot get a number when there's a negative under the root. So again, notice all the values, including 0, worked except for this negative value, and that's because you can't find the square root of a negative number. There are no numbers that multiply to be a negative. You could do negative 2 times negative 2 to be a positive 4. You can do 2 times 2 to be a positive 4. But there is no way to multiply these 2's to get a negative 4, which is why that's impossible. Alright, we're going to use that fact to find the domain of every square root function. Again, the general idea you need to understand is that you cannot have a negative under a root. So keep in mind the domain represents the values of x that can be used in a function. Look at the following examples with me real quick. Here, the numbers that I can use, because it's plus 5, the only thing under the root, if I'm talking domain, is this x, which means that x is just 0, 1, 2, 3, and everything else bigger than that. I can use all those numbers. I cannot use a negative x here because that would make it wrong. That plus 5 does not affect me though. Here, square root of x minus 3, again, that minus 3 doesn't really affect me because this is the only square root part, which means again I can use 0, 1, 2, 3, and everything else bigger than that. Here though, of x minus 3, 0 actually doesn't work, because 0 minus 3 is negative 3. So the question is, what's the smallest number I can use? I think 3 minus 3 would actually get me to 0, which means the only numbers I could use here are 3, 4, 5, 6, and numbers bigger than that. Again, this you can't use 0 on, because if I try to use 0, then it's actually going to be illegal, because 0 minus 3 gives me a negative. So that changes my set of numbers I can use. If you look at x plus 6, 0 works, but more than 0 works. I could actually use negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, and negative 6 up that line, because negative 6 plus 6 is actually 0, and everything higher than that would be positive or be possible. So the main thing you got to do is make sure you don't allow yourself to become intimidated by what you just saw. This was just a general explanation. What we're actually going to see going on is coming up right now. So write this down for yourself. This is really what you need to understand. The domain of a square root function is that the radical portion has to be greater than or equal to 0. Algebraically, this is what it looks like. And really that is what we're going to use. Alright, so how does the algebraic explanation help? It's just that we're going to use it every time that domain is asked for. So pause the video if you need to, because I'm about to get into some problems here, and then we'll be done very quickly, and then you'll go to your Math Excel and continue on and earn all your points that you can to get your grades right. Problem 1 wants to know what the domain is of the following function. So all we have to do is remember that the radical portion, which is this, has to be greater than or equal to 0. So all we have to do is say x plus 3 must be greater than or equal to 0. That's it. This is what's under it, so it has to be greater than or equal to 0, and we solve it. So we subtract 3 from both sides. That is your domain. X is greater than or equal to negative 3. Again, notice putting a negative 3 in here makes it 0. Everything bigger than that will work also. Negative 2, negative 1, 0, and so forth. Those all work. That's how you find domain. That's how easy it is. Find the radical part, type it algebraically that the radical has to be greater than or equal to 0, and solve it. Looking at problem 2. Again, you want the domain. That means we just want to know what values of x work. Your radical portion here is x minus 6. And again, for what I know about domain, for radicals it has to be greater than or equal to 0. Now I just solve it. Plus 6 plus 6. That is my domain, is that x must be greater than or equal to 6. Notice again, 0 doesn't work because 0 minus 6 actually breaks it. Also notice I'm not even caring about the 7 when I'm talking about the domain, because domain is just what's under the radical, and that's what you're focusing on. Alright. Problem 3 again wants to know a domain. So when you're talking domain, you look under the radical and say this is what's under the radical, and it has to be greater than or equal to 0. From there you solve. Negative or minus 9 minus 9. Divide by 3. And this is telling me that x has to be negative 3 or higher. Which makes sense because negative 3 times 3 is negative 9. Negative 9 plus 9 gives me that 0, and everything else bigger is going to give me a higher number. Last one before we get started. What's the domain of the following function? The radical portion has to be greater than or equal to 0. Well, the only thing under the radical here is x. And because that's already solved, that is my domain. Alright. So other than that, as I said, make good choices today. I will be back tonight or after school to kind of look at what you did and look at the notes the sub makes. But again, make good choices today. I would hate to ruin your score or ruin your grade off of a day where you just could not be responsible and do what you're supposed to do. So other than that, as I said, make sure you're working. If you're working together, work quietly. All the joking around and stuff gets to be a little bit too much. Listen to what the teachers tell you, and again, make sure you start working to understand that we are not going to be playing games all year, because it's not that time. Other than that, go on to your Math Excel and again, make sure you work to try to finish this stuff up. Good luck.